They just surrounded us. Human, Sar whispered quietly, her blood-soaked eyes, looking up at the ring of muscular warriors surrounding them. Good, Riv smiled coldly, his eyes flashing with excitement. Now, I don't need to aim. The harsh red sun of Varkon IV blazed like doomsday across the barren landscape. Ash and dust hung in the air, remnants of the battle that had just taken place. The ecosystem was unforgiving, swirling dust winds, cracked rock faces, daytime temperatures reaching 50 degrees C that plummeted to freezing at night. It was a planet on the distant periphery of the Galactic Alliance, a place where only the desperate or the damned would choose to make their stand. Sar Valen felt both. The female captain of the resistance forces stood with her back against the jagged rock wall, her combat armor in tatters, dried blood caking her left side where a makeshift bandage struggled to hold. Hours earlier, she had survived a brutal ambush to rescue her comrade. Now, that very rescue mission had led them both into a trap. Beside her stood Riv Harrow, the Resistance's engineer cryptographer. His pale skin contrasted sharply with his black tech coat, and his face remained eerily calm, almost emotionless despite their dire circumstances. The Draken Horde had captured him during a covert raid, and now both of them were trapped in a narrow canyon, the enemy's circle closing in tight around them. "How many?" Sar whispered, her fingers twitching near the empty holster at her side. They had taken her weapons upon capture. 217, Riv answered without hesitation, his eyes scanning methodically. Drakon warriors, Eastern clan judging by the scale patterns. 4 snipers on the ridge, 6 heavy infantry at the main approach. Sar struggled to control her breathing. The thin air of Varkon IV made every breath labor, and her injuries from the earlier firefight weren't helping. Blood seeped through her bandages, leaving dark, crimson trails down her combat suit. "Can we fight through?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Riv's eyes continued their calculated assessment. "Not directly," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "But we won't need to." Before Sar could ask what he meant, a roar erupted from the gathering Draken forces. The crowd parted as a massive figure strode forward, at least 7 feet tall, with dark green scales covering muscular limbs. A crown of dragon bones sat atop his elongated head, and a tiger skull mantle rested upon his broad shoulders. "Chieftain Khazar," Riv murmured, "right on time." The Draken leader raised a ceremonial staff adorned with vertebrae and pointed it at the 2 captives. His voice boomed across the canyon, the natural acoustics amplifying his words. "The outsiders have been captured," he proclaimed in the common tongue, clearly intended for Sar and Riv to understand. "The desecrators of our sacred grounds will face the trial of ancestors." The assembled warriors beat their weapons against their scaled chests, creating a rhythmic thunder that echoed off the canyon walls. Sar felt her stomach tighten. She had heard stories of the Draken trials. None ended well for the participants. "What's he talking about?" she whispered to Riv. "Their religious combat ritual," he replied, still observing every detail around them. "One dies. One returns to tell of death. It's their way of spreading fear." 4 heavily armored Draken warriors approached, their spears pointed at Sar and Riv. With rough shoves, they herded the captives toward the center of the gathering. As they walked, Sar noticed the canyon opening into a wider space ahead, a natural arena surrounded by steep rock walls. In the center stood 2 metal cages, ancient and fossilized, placed above a deep trench. "Don't resist," Riv said under his breath as they were pushed forward. "Not yet." Sar wanted to argue, but something in Riv's tone stopped her. The engineer rarely spoke without purpose, and despite his apparent calm, she sensed he was analyzing everything around them. She'd heard stories about Riv Harrow, how he'd survived impossible scenarios through calculation rather than combat. Now she would see if those stories held truth. They were forced to their knees before Chieftain Khazar. Up close, The Draken leader was even more imposing. His scales glistened with ritual oils, and intricate patterns were carved into the harder plates across his chest and shoulders. His eyes, vertical slits of amber against black, regarded them with religious hatred. "You," he said, pointing his staff at Sar. "Female warrior, you killed 12 of my scouts in the northern pass." Sar met his gaze defiantly. "They were slaughtering civilians." The chieftain's expression didn't change. "And you," he turned to Riv, "infiltrated our holy chambers, touched our sacred artifacts. These are crimes against the serpent god." Riv said nothing, his face betraying no emotion. "The punishment is the trial by Serpent's Cage," Khazar announced. "You will face each other in combat. One will die. One will return to spread the message of Draken might." The surrounding warriors roared their approval. Sar felt her blood run cold. They wanted her to kill Riv, or be killed by him. Either way, the Draken would win. "I won't fight him," she stated firmly. Chieftain Khazar's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of pointed teeth. "Then you both die slowly, over many days, as entertainment for my warriors." Sar's hands clenched into fists. She glanced at Riv, expecting to see fear, resignation, or at least concern. Instead, she found him studying the ceremonial staff in Khazar's hands with intense focus. "We accept the trial," Riv said suddenly. "What?" Sar hissed. But Riv gave her a sharp, meaningful look. "Wise," Khazar nodded. "Prepare them for the cages." The warriors seized them once more, dragging them toward the metal constructions at the center of the arena. As they were pulled apart, Riv caught Sar's eye one last time. "Trust me," he mouthed silently. "Watch. Listen. Wait." They were thrown into separate cages, ancient metal constructs that looked as though they'd been used for centuries. The bars were rusted, but still strong. The floors stained dark with what Sar recognized as old blood. Her cage was positioned about 20 feet from Riv's, both suspended above the deep trench that cut through the arena floor. A Draken warrior approached Sar's cage and thrust a weapon through the bars, a dull, notched blade that had seen better days. "For the female," he grunted. "The male fights with spirit challenge only." Sar took the blade, feeling its poor balance and blunted edge. It was barely better than no weapon at all, clearly intended to make the fight long and painful for the audience's entertainment. Across the gap, Riv received nothing. He stood in his cage, hands empty, his eyes constantly moving, taking in details of their surroundings, the positions of guards, the construction of the cages. Sar wondered what he could possibly be seeing that would help them. Chieftain Khazar took position on an elevated rock platform, raising his staff. "When the sun touches the western ridge, the cages will open. The combat begins. The serpent god will feast on the loser's soul." The Draken warriors began to disperse to various positions around the arena, taking up places to witness the coming spectacle. Some remained as guards, their spears pointed toward the cages. Sar gripped the poor excuse for a blade and moved to the side of her cage closest to Riv. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "We can't fight each other, and we can't escape these cages." Riv finally met her gaze. "We're not going to fight each other," he said quietly. "And we're not going to escape the cages." "Then what?" "We're going to make them open the cages for us," he interrupted. "And when they do, we'll be ready." "Ready for what? There are over 200 of them." A faint smile touched Riv's lips. "Numbers don't matter when fear takes hold," he said. "Watch the guards. Note their patrol patterns. Count their steps. Memorize the changing of shifts. Look for the resonance points in the rock walls." Sar stared at him incredulously. "What are you talking about?" "Psychological warfare," Riv replied, his voice barely audible. "The Draken rule through religious fear. Their warriors are bound by ritual and superstition. Break their faith, and you break their ranks." Despite her skepticism, Sar found herself observing as Riv suggested. The guards moved in regular patterns, 6 steps one way, turn, 6 steps back. They changed positions every 30 minutes, marked by a distant drumbeat. The warriors all faced the central altar when the drumbeat sounded, a momentary lapse in vigilance. As the afternoon wore on, Sar watched Riv meticulously examining every inch of his cage. He tested bars, scraped at the floor, collected small fragments of stone and metal. To the casual observer, he might have appeared to be a desperate prisoner seeking any means of escape. But Sar noticed the methodical nature of his actions. He was gathering materials. When the guards weren't looking, he showed her a small pile of sharpened stone shards and metal fragments he'd collected from a broken energy mill beneath his cage. He'd arranged them in what appeared to be a crude sound amplifier of some kind. "What is that?" she whispered during a moment when the guards were distracted. "Tiger frequency resonator," he replied cryptically. "It calls the desert beasts the Draken fear." "How does that help us?" "Every piece has its purpose," Riv said. "The psychological attack has 3 phases. First, we create doubt. Then, we exploit their religious fears. Finally, we trigger panic." Sar wasn't convinced, but she had no better plan. As the sun began its descent toward the western ridge, her anxiety grew. "If this doesn't work—" "It will," Riv assured her. "When the time comes, follow my lead without hesitation. No matter how strange my actions seem." The hours passed slowly. Sar's wounds throbbed, and thirst clawed at her throat. The Draken had provided no water, clearly intending to weaken them before the combat. She noticed Riv carefully rationing his energy, sitting still, breathing evenly, conserving strength. She tried to do the same, fighting against her instinct to rattle the cage and scream defiance. As twilight approached, more Draken warriors gathered around the arena. They built large fires that cast dancing shadows against the canyon walls. Drums began to beat more frequently, and warriors chanted in their native tongue, harsh, guttural sounds that echoed ominously. "What are they saying?" Sar asked. "Death prayers," Riv translated. "They're asking the serpent god to accept your soul or mine." In the center of the arena, between the 2 suspended cages, Sar noticed an altar made of bones, a shrine to the Draken ancestors. Warriors approached it reverently, placing small tokens and murmuring prayers. The altar was illuminated by ceremonial torches, casting an eerie glow across its macabre construction. "That's their weak point." Riv nodded toward the bone altar. "Their entire belief system centered in one physical location. What can we possibly do to it from inside these cages?" "Wait and see," Riv replied. Night fell completely. The temperature dropped rapidly, another cruel aspect of Varkon 4's harsh environment. Sar shivered in her tattered uniform, her wounds stiffening in the cold. The fires around the arena provided little warmth to the prisoners in their elevated cages. The drums suddenly quieted. Chieftain Khazar approached the center of the arena, standing before the bone altar. He raised his staff, and the assembled warriors fell silent. "The moment approaches," he announced. "When the moons align, the cages will descend. The combat will commence." Sar looked up at the sky. Through the dusty atmosphere, she could see Varkon's 3 moons slowly moving into conjunction. They had perhaps 20 minutes before the trial would begin. "Riv," she hissed urgently, "whatever you're planning, now would be the time." Riv nodded once. "Watch the northern wall," he whispered. "When you hear the rumble, be ready to move." He turned away, huddling in the corner of his cage as though overcome by fear. The Draken guards noticed and laughed among themselves, pointing at the seemingly broken prisoner. Sar understood then. Riv was playing into their expectations, making them underestimate him. She directed her attention to the northern canyon wall, as instructed. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the steep rock face illuminated by firelight. Then, as she watched more carefully, She noticed tiny reflections at various points along the wall, small metallic objects positioned in crevices. "What did you—" she began, but Riv silenced her with a sharp glance. The moons continued their celestial dance overhead. The Draken chanting grew louder, more frenzied. Warriors began to stamp their feet in unison, creating a rhythmic vibration that Sar could feel through the cage floor. Then, just as the three moons formed a perfect triangle in the night sky, Riv made his move. With surprising speed, he assembled his collection of stones and metal fragments into a makeshift horn. Before the guards could react, he put it to his lips and blew. Not a loud sound, but a specific frequency that seemed to ripple through the air. For a moment, nothing happened. The Draken warriors paused in confusion, looking toward Riv's cage. Then the northern wall began to tremble. It started as a low rumble, barely perceptible, then grew stronger, until loose stones began to cascade down the canyon face. The rumbling took on a pattern, like the growl of some massive beast, resonating through the rock itself. The effect on the Draken was immediate and dramatic. Warriors closest to the wall backed away, their discipline cracking. Murmurs of Dragon's voice spread through the ranks. The sacred drums faltered in their rhythm. "What's happening?" Sar whispered, amazed at the reaction. "Resonance mines," Riv explained quickly. "I placed them during our capture. The frequency from this horn triggers vibrations in the rock that match their divine dragon's roar from their religious texts. Phase 1 complete. Doubt has entered their minds." Chieftain Khazar roared for order, his staff striking the ground. "Silence! It is merely the rock settling. The outsider has no power." But even as he spoke, Riv moved to Phase 2. From his tattered sleeve, he produced a small shard of bone, somehow acquired during their capture. With precise movements, he reached through the bars of his cage and scratched something onto the surface of the bone altar below. A nearby guard noticed and rushed forward, but it was too late. Riv had completed his inscription. When the torchlight hit the newly carved symbol, several Draken warriors gasped in horror. One dropped to his knees, hands covering his eyes. "Mavaran," the whisper spread through the crowd like wildfire. "The death curse!" "What did you write?" Sar asked, astonished at the reaction. "The symbol of their mythical destroyer," Riv replied. "According to their legends, when the mark appears, their serpent god turns against them. Pure superstition, but deeply ingrained in their psyche." Chaos was beginning to spread. The disciplined formation of warriors began to break down as arguments erupted between those who wanted to flee and those demanding they maintain their positions. Chieftain Khazar bellowed commands, but the religious panic was taking hold. "Phase 2 complete," Riv said. "Religious doubt installed. Now for the finale." The rumbling from the northern wall suddenly intensified. Small explosions erupted along the rock face, more of Riv's planted devices detonating in sequence. The vibrations created a cascading effect, causing larger rocks to break free and crash down into the arena. Simultaneously, a high-pitched keening sound cut through the night air, Riv's horn producing a different frequency now. Sar was about to ask what this new sound meant when she heard the answer approaching from above. Screeching cries echoed from the darkness beyond the canyon rim. Massive shapes descended on wide, leathery wings, cold vultures, the fearsome carrion birds of Varkonfer, dozens of them, drawn by Riv's sonic beacon, diving toward the gathered Draken. The arena erupted into complete chaos. Warriors scattered as rocks tumbled down and razor-beaked vultures swooped among them. Religious panic compounded the natural fear, as many Draken believed this was the wrath of their deity made manifest. "Now!" Riv shouted over the din. "Use your blade on the cage lock when the next tremor hits." Sar positioned her dull blade at the ancient lock mechanism. When the next vibration shook the canyon, she thrust with all her strength. The corroded metal gave way, the door swinging open. At the same moment, Riv's cage also burst open. He had apparently prepared his lock as well. Both prisoners leapt from their suspended cages, landing hard on the arena floor amid the confusion. "This way!" Riv grabbed Sar's arm, pulling her toward the eastern edge of the arena where the shadows were deepest. As they ran, he scooped up a fallen Draken weapon, a plasma rifle dropped by a fleeing guard. Sar had never seen such complete disarray in a military force. The once disciplined Draken horde had devolved into a panicked mob. Some warriors fought the vultures, others fled the falling rocks, while still others prostrated themselves before the altar, begging forgiveness from their deity. "My team?" Sar asked, as they took cover behind a fallen boulder. "3 of them survived the initial ambush," Riv replied, checking the plasma rifle's charge. "They're positioned outside the eastern ravine, waiting for our signal." "You knew they were alive? How?" "I arranged our capture," Riv said matter-of-factly. "It was the only way to reach the heart of the Draken force. Your rescue attempt was anticipated. I left breadcrumbs for your team to follow." Sar stared at him in disbelief. "You used us as bait?" "I used myself as bait," he corrected. "You chose to follow. But we can discuss ethics later. Right now, we need to move." Across the arena, Chieftain Khazar had managed to rally a group of elite warriors. They formed a protective circle around him as he raised his sacred staff, trying to regain control of his forces. "Infidels!" his voice boomed over the chaos. "The outsiders escape. 50 honor marks to whoever brings me their heads." A group of Draken warriors turned in their direction, religious fervor overcoming their fear. Sar seized a spear from the ground, brandishing it alongside her dull blade. "We can't fight them all," she warned. "We don't need to," Riv replied, raising the plasma rifle. Instead of aiming at the approaching warriors, he targeted the sacred staff in Khazar's hand. The plasma bolt streaked across the arena, striking the staff with pinpoint accuracy. The ancient artifact exploded in a shower of fragments, the shock knocking Khazar backward. A hush fell over the arena, momentarily drowning out even the screeching vultures. Every Drakon warrior stared in horror at their leader and the shattered emblem of their power. "The serpent's scepter is broken," a voice cried out. "The god has abandoned us." That was the final blow to Draken morale. What had been disorder became complete disintegration. Warriors turned on each other, some blaming their comrades for the divine punishment, others simply fleeing in terror. A small faction of clear-headed officers attempted to maintain order, but they were overwhelmed by the religious panic. "Now we run," Riv said, firing several more shots to create additional confusion. "Eastern Passage. Your team is waiting." They sprinted across the arena floor, dodging fallen rocks and fighting Draken. Sar used her spear with lethal efficiency when necessary, clearing a path through the few warriors who still blocked their way. Riv maintained a covering fire, his shots precisely targeted to cause maximum psychological impact, hitting religious symbols and communication devices rather than warriors themselves. As they reached the Eastern Passage, a narrow cleft in the canyon wall, 3 figures emerged from the shadows. Sar recognized them immediately. Mila, her sniper specialist, Jaren, their field medic, and Kohan, the support engineer. "Captain!" Mila's relief was evident as she raised her rifle in salute. "We thought you were dead when the explosion started." "Harrow's work," Sar explained briefly. "We need to move. The Draken won't stay scattered for long." "There are more prisoners," Kohan reported. "We found a holding area while scouting the perimeter. At least 20 resistance fighters." Sar turned to Riv. "You knew about them too?" "Suspected," he corrected. "The Draken take prisoners for their arena spectacles. It was logical they'd have more captives." "We need to free them," Sar decided. "Which way?" Kohan pointed deeper into the ravine. "Underground facility. 2 guards at the entrance. But they ran when the chaos started." "Perfect," Riv said. "We'll need everyone if we're going to make it across the Dawn Ridge before morning." The small team moved quickly through the narrow passage, leaving behind the sounds of continued chaos in the main arena. As they descended deeper into the ravine, they encountered the entrance to the Draken's underground fortress, a metal door set into the rock face, now standing ajar after its guards had fled. "Careful," Mila warned, taking point with her sniper rifle. "There might still be loyalists inside." They entered a dimly lit corridor carved from the living rock. The walls were adorned with Drakon religious symbols, serpents devouring their prey, ancestral warriors in battle poses. The air was stale and carried the unmistakable scent of fear. At the first junction, they encountered resistance, two Drakon warriors who had maintained their posts despite the chaos above. Mila's rifle cracked twice, and the threat was eliminated before they could raise an alarm. "The holding cells should be this way," Kohan indicated a downward-sloping passage. Based on standard Drakon architecture, as they moved deeper into the facility, Sar noticed Riv collecting more materials: small power cells, communication devices, pieces of Drakon technology. He worked methodically, even as they advanced, assembling something in his hands. "What are you making now?" she asked. "Insurance," he replied cryptically. "The Drakon will regroup eventually. We need a deterrent to cover our escape." They reached the prison section, a long hallway lined with cells. Inside each, resistance fighters sat or lay on bare stone floors. Many were injured. All showed signs of malnutrition and mistreatment. When they saw Sar and her team, expressions of disbelief gave way to hope. Kohan quickly bypassed the security system, and cell doors slid open. Jaren moved from prisoner to prisoner, assessing injuries and administering emergency treatment where needed. "Most can walk," he reported to Sar. "3 need to be carried. All are dehydrated and malnourished, but alive." Sar addressed the freed prisoners, keeping her voice low but authoritative. "We have a narrow window of escape. The Drakon forces are in disarray, but it won't last. Those who can fight, take weapons from the armory we passed. Those who can't, stay in the center of our formation. We move fast. We move quiet. And we don't stop until we reach the Dawn Ridge." As the prisoners armed themselves and formed up, Riv approached Sar with his completed device, a small, cylindrical object with multiple antennae protruding from it. "What is that?" she asked. "Frequency disruptor," he explained. "It will interfere with Drakon communication and trigger secondary resonance mines I planted throughout their facility. Once activated, we'll have approximately 20 minutes before this entire complex becomes structurally unsound." "You're going to collapse it?" Sar was impressed despite herself. "Only enough to make pursuit impossible," Riv clarified. "I'm not genocidal, just thorough." With their rescued comrades ready, the expanded group began their retreat through the underground facility. They encountered minimal resistance. Most Drakon warriors had either joined the chaos above or barricaded themselves in defensive positions. When they reached the surface again, the night sky was ablaze with firelight. The main arena was still in turmoil, though some semblance of order was beginning to form around several Drakon sub-commanders. "They're reorganizing faster than I expected," Riv observed. "We need to move now." He activated the disruptor device and placed it in a ventilation shaft. Almost immediately, a high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by rumbling deeper within the facility. "Eastern path," Sar directed. "Single file. Maintain contact with the person ahead of you." The group moved like shadows along the edge of the ravine, staying close to the rock wall where darkness was deepest. Behind them, explosions began to ripple through the Drakon complex, Riv's resonance mines detonating in sequence, collapsing tunnels and sealing entrances. Their path led upward, toward a narrow cleft in the eastern canyon wall known as Dawn Ridge. A treacherous route, but one that would take them away from Drakon territory if they could navigate it before sunrise. The climb was brutal. Injured prisoners struggled with the steep terrain, requiring help from stronger comrades. Sar and Mila took turns scouting ahead, while Riv and Kohan monitored their rear for signs of pursuit. The temperature continued to drop as night deepened, adding hypothermia to their list of concerns. Halfway up the ridge, they paused briefly to rest. From their elevated position, they could see the Draken complex below, parts of it now collapsed, fires burning in others. Draken warriors scurried about like ants whose nest had been disturbed, trying to establish a perimeter and account for their losses. "They're in disarray, but not defeated," Sar observed. "They'll hunt us once they regroup." "Their command structure is fractured," Riv replied. "Without their religious symbols, and with their sacred spaces desecrated, they'll spend days performing cleansing rituals before organizing a serious pursuit." Sar studied him in the moonlight. "You understand them that well?" "I study weaknesses," he said simply. "Every society has them. The Draken built theirs on religious absolutism, powerful when intact, catastrophic when broken. They resumed their climb as the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky. The narrow path became increasingly treacherous, barely wide enough for one person, with sheer drops on either side. They moved in silence, each focused on the next step, the next handhold. As they neared the summit, a sound from below froze them in place, the distinctive call of Draken hunting horns. "They're tracking us," Mila whispered, her sniper's eyes scanning the darkness below. "How many?" Sar asked. "Small party," Mila replied after a moment. "Maybe a dozen. Scouts rather than a full hunting party." Riv checked the charge on his plasma rifle. "I'll handle it," he said. "Get everyone else to the summit." "No," Sar countered. "We go together or not at all. Mila, can you find a position?" The sniper nodded, already moving to a rock outcropping that offered both cover and a clear line of sight down the path they had climbed. "Kohan, help Jaren get the wounded to the top," Sar ordered. "Everyone else, prepare to defend if necessary, but keep moving upward." As the main group continued their ascent, Sar, Riv, and Mila took positions to cover their retreat. The hunting horn sounded again, closer now. In the growing light, they could see movement on the path below, the distinctive silhouettes of Draken scouts picking their way upward. "They're moving faster than they should be able to on this terrain," Sar observed. "They're desperate," Riv explained. "Their entire belief system was shattered tonight. These aren't disciplined warriors anymore. They're fanatics seeking redemption." Mila's rifle cracked, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. Below, a Draken scout tumbled from the path. "One down," she reported calmly. "But they know we're here now." The Draken below scattered, taking cover behind rocks and crevices. Their advance slowed, but didn't stop. "We need to buy more time," Sar said, checking her borrowed weapons. Riv reached into his pocket and produced a small, spherical device, another creation assembled from scavenged parts. "This should help," he said. "Cover your ears when I give the signal." He leaned out from their position and threw the device down the path. It bounced once, twice, then rolled to a stop among the advancing Draken. "Now," he warned, covering his own ears. The device didn't explode as Sar expected. Instead, it emitted a piercing sonic pulse, the same frequency Riv had used earlier to call the cold vultures, but much more intense at close range. The effect on the Draken scouts was devastating. Their sensitive hearing, evolved for hunting, made them particularly vulnerable to the sonic attack. They clutched their heads in agony, several losing their balance and falling from the narrow path. "Go," Riv urged. "That won't hold them long." They retreated upward, rejoining the main group as they neared the summit. The eastern sky was brightening rapidly now, the harsh sun of Varkon IV preparing to make its appearance. They needed to be over the ridge and into the sheltered valleys beyond before full daylight exposed them to any Draken who might survive the sonic attack. With a final push, they crested the summit of Dawn Ridge. Before them stretched a panoramic view of the eastern territories, a landscape of red rock and dust, but one free of Draken control. In the far distance, they could see the outline of Dune region, where the resistance maintained its primary base. "We made it," Jaren breathed, helping a wounded fighter to sit and rest. "Not yet," Sar cautioned. "We still have to make it across the Dust Valley to reach the outpost." As the group prepared for the descent down the eastern face of the ridge, Sar found Riv standing apart, looking back toward the Draken territory they had escaped. His expression was thoughtful, calculating. "What are you thinking?" she asked, joining him. "That we did more than rescue prisoners today," he replied. "We created a fundamental crack in Draken society. Their religion is their governance system. By attacking its symbols, we've destabilized their entire hierarchy. You planned this from the beginning." Sar realized. Being captured, the psychological warfare. It was never just about escape. Riv nodded. "The Draken horde has been expanding across the outer planets for decades, using religious terror as their primary weapon. Conventional warfare hasn't stopped them. I needed to test whether psychological operations could succeed, where direct confrontation failed." "And did it?" Sar asked. "Will this setback actually stop them?" "Not completely," Riv admitted. "But it's a proof of concept. The Resistance now has a new strategy, one that targets the enemy's belief systems rather than just their warriors." Sar looked out over the waking landscape, the first rays of sunlight turning the dusty atmosphere into a golden haze. She thought about the chaos they had left behind, the collapsed authority, the broken faith, the Draken turning against each other. "It's a cruel way to fight," she said quietly. "War is cruel," Riv replied. "But this way saves lives on both sides. The Draken will rebuild their faith, but it will be weaker. Doubt has entered their perfect system, and doubt is more powerful than any weapon." The rest of their group had begun the descent down the eastern slope. Sar knew they should join them. There was still a long journey ahead before they reached safety. But something held her in place, a need to understand the man beside her. "Who are you really, Riv Harrow?" she asked. "No engineer has the skills you've demonstrated today." A faint smile touched his lips. "Former psychological operations specialist," he admitted. "Before the Draken expansion, I studied their culture, their religion, their weaknesses. When conventional military tactics failed, I proposed an alternative approach. My superiors didn't approve, so I went independent." "And got yourself deliberately captured?" Sar shook her head in disbelief. "That's either brilliance or madness." "The line between the two is thinner than most realize," he said. "Come, we should join the others." As they began their descent, a movement in the sky caught Sar's attention. A flock of birds circling in the distance, their silhouettes dark against the morning light. "Cold vultures," she identified them. "Scavengers." "They sense death," Riv nodded. "The aftermath of what we've left behind." The descent was easier than the climb had been, though still challenging with injured comrades to assist. By mid-morning, they had reached the valley floor and found shelter in a rock formation that provided shade from the increasingly brutal sun. Jaren moved among the rescued prisoners, checking wounds and distributing their limited water supplies. Mila maintained a watch position, her sniper's eyes constantly scanning for threats. Kohan worked with Riv, repairing and recharging the weapons they had salvaged from the Draken facility. Sar found herself staring back at the ridge they had crossed, half expecting to see Draken warriors appearing at the summit. But the ridge remained empty, the only movement coming from dust devils swirling in the morning heat. "They won't follow," Riv said, noticing her vigilance. "Not today, at least. Their world has been turned upside down. It will take time for them to process what happened." "And when they do?" Sar asked. "They'll either emerge stronger, having questioned and refined their beliefs, or weaker, clinging to dogma despite evidence of its fallibility," he replied. "Either way, they'll never again be the monolithic force they were yesterday." Sar considered this. Throughout her military career, she had approached conflict directly, strength against strength, courage against courage. Riv's method was different, subtle, psychological, attacking the foundations rather than the structure. I still don't understand how you knew it would work, she admitted. Riv gazed out at the barren landscape. Because faith, whether in religion, leadership, or cause, is both the strongest and most fragile human construct. It can drive people to incredible feats or terrible atrocities. But it requires constant reinforcement, constant validation. Remove that, introduce doubt, and even the most fervent believer begins to question. That's a cynical view, Sar observed. Realistic, he corrected. I don't take joy in breaking faith. Sar. But when that faith is used to justify conquest and slaughter, it becomes a legitimate military target. Their conversation was interrupted by Kohan's approach. Captain, he reported. Communications equipment is functional. We've made contact with Outpost Dune. They're sending transport to these coordinates. ETA? Sar asked. 3 hours, assuming they don't encounter Draken patrols. Sar nodded. Set up a perimeter. Rotating watch. Everyone else rests while we can. As the group organized their temporary camp, Sar found herself watching Riv. He had moved slightly apart from the others and was disassembling one of his devices, carefully preserving components for future use. His hands worked with precision, even as his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. A man always planning, always calculating. She approached him again. Why did you tell me to trust you? She asked. Back in the cages. You could have implemented your plan without my cooperation. Riv looked up from his work. Because panic is contagious, he said simply. If you had panicked, others would have followed. I needed you calm, observant, ready to act when the moment came. You manipulated me, Sar realized. I directed your focus, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? She challenged. You used the same techniques on me that you used on the Draken. Riv set down his tools and gave her his full attention. No, he said firmly. With the Draken, I exploited superstition to create fear. With you, I shared only what you needed to know to maintain hope. Hope and fear, opposite ends of the same spectrum, but with vastly different outcomes. Sar wasn't entirely convinced, but she recognized the pragmatism in his approach. In war, information was often compartmentalized, distributed on a need-to-know basis. Riv had kept his full plan to himself, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Next time, she said, share more of your plan. I'm not a superstitious Draken warrior. I can handle complexity. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Noted, Captain. The hours passed slowly under the punishing sun. The rescued prisoners rested in whatever shade they could find, many sleeping for the first time in days, without fear of Draken torment. Mila and Kohan maintained their watch positions, while Jaren continued to treat the wounded with their limited medical supplies. Sar found herself dwelling on the events in the Draken arena. The chaos they had unleashed had been effective, certainly, but also disturbing. She had been trained to face enemies directly, to defeat them through superior skill or strategy. Riv's approach felt different, less honorable somehow, though she couldn't deny its effectiveness. You're troubled, Riv observed, rejoining her after completing his work. I was just thinking about how many we killed today, she admitted. Fewer than you might think, he replied. Most of the casualties were from Drakon turning on each other, or falling during their panic. The resonance mines were designed to create vibration and sound, not lethal explosive force. Still, Sar persisted, we disrupted their entire society. We broke something fundamental to them. Something they were using to justify conquest and slaughter, Riv reminded her. The Draken Horde has destroyed 12 outer colonies in the past year alone. Millions dead. Conventional military responses have failed consistently. I know, Sar sighed. I've seen the reports. I've lost friends to their expansion. It's just, this kind of warfare feels different. It is different, Riv acknowledged. It targets beliefs rather than bodies. Some would argue it's more humane. Others would say it's more insidious. Both have valid points. Before Sar could respond, a call came from Mila at her watch position. "Movement to the east! Multiple signatures!" Everyone tensed, reaching for weapons. Sar joined Mila at her vantage point, scanning the horizon. "Resistance transport," Mila confirmed after a moment, lowering her rifle. 3 skimmers, standard formation. Relief washed through the camp. The skimmers approached rapidly, dust clouds billowing in their wake. Within minutes, they had arrived, sleek, low-profile vehicles designed for speed rather than comfort, bearing the insignia of the resistance. The lead vehicle's hatch opened, and a familiar figure emerged, Commander Laris, head of operations for the eastern sector. Her weathered face registered shock as she surveyed the group of rescued prisoners. "By the void," she breathed. "We thought you were all dead. The reports from the Draken territory indicated total loss." "Reports were exaggerated," Sar replied, clasping the commander's offered arm in greeting. "We have 23 survivors, several in need of immediate medical attention." "And the Draken?" Laris asked, her expression hardening. "In disarray," Riv answered, stepping forward. "Their command structure has been compromised, their religious confidence shaken. They won't be mounting offensive operations for some time." Laris regarded him with curiosity. "You must be Harrow. Your disappearance caused quite a stir in high command. Some suspected defection." "A necessary deception," he replied without apology. "My mission required deep penetration of Draken territory, which he accomplished by getting captured," Sar added, unable to keep a hint of criticism from her tone. Laris raised an eyebrow. "Unorthodox, but effective if what you say about the Draken is true." She turned back to the waiting skimmers. "We can discuss details at base. For now, let's get these people to safety." The loading process was efficient. The most seriously wounded were placed in the lead vehicle with Jaren to monitor their condition. The remaining survivors distributed themselves among the other skimmers. Within minutes, they were ready to depart. Sar found herself in the last vehicle with Riv, Mila, and Kohan. As the skimmer's engines engaged and they began to move across the dusty terrain, she took a final look back at Dawn Ridge, the narrow pass that had led them from captivity to freedom. "They had us surrounded," she murmured, remembering the moment when the Draken warriors had closed in around them. Beside her, Riv's lips curved in a faint smile. "And we surrounded them with their own fear," he replied. The skimmers accelerated, racing toward the distant resistance base. Behind them, dust settled over their tracks, erasing evidence of their passage across the barren landscape of Varkon Fu. The journey to Outpost Dune took several hours, the skimmers maintaining maximum speed across the open desert. They encountered no Draken patrols, unusual for this region, but consistent with Riv's assessment of their disorganized state. Sar used the time to check on her team and the rescued prisoners, moving carefully through the cramped confines of the vehicle. Most were sleeping or sitting in exhausted silence, the reality of their escape still sinking in. She found Mila at the rear observation port, her sniper's instinct keeping her vigilant despite their apparent safety. "Anything?" Sar asked, joining her. Mila shook her head. "Clear skies, clear ground. It's eerie. This sector is usually crawling with Draken scouts." "Enjoy the reprieve," Sar advised. "It won't last forever." "What happened back there, Captain?" Mila asked, lowering her voice. "I've never seen Draken forces break like that. They're usually fanatically disciplined." Sar considered how to explain. "Harrow found a weakness in their social structure," she said finally. "A vulnerability none of us had exploited before." "Is that something we can replicate?" Mila's eyes gleamed with strategic interest. "I don't know," Sar admitted, "but I think that's what High Command will want to determine." As the sun reached its zenith, the outline of Outpost Dune appeared on the horizon, a fortified compound built into a massive rock formation. Its sand-colored walls blended with the surrounding terrain, making it difficult to spot from a distance, a deliberate design choice to avoid Dracon aerial detection. The skimmers approached a concealed entrance, a narrow ravine that appeared natural, but had been subtly widened to accommodate vehicles. As they passed between the high rock walls, temperature dropped noticeably, offering blessed relief from the punishing sun. The ravine opened into a hidden valley where the main facilities of Outpost Dune were located. Unlike the crude Dracon structures, the Resistance base was a model of efficient design, prefabricated buildings arranged in concentric circles around a central command hub, with defensive positions integrated at strategic points. Medical teams were waiting as the skimmers came to a halt in the designated arrival zone. The wounded were transferred to stretchers and rushed to the infirmary, while the remaining survivors were directed to processing areas for identification and debriefing. Commander Laris approached Sar and Riv as they disembarked. "High Command wants an immediate report," she informed them, particularly regarding the state of the Dracon forces. "My team needs rest," Sar began to protest. "Your team will be taken care of," Laris assured her. "But you and Harrow need to brief the command staff. What happened in Dracon territory could change our entire strategic approach." Sar reluctantly agreed, though her body ached for rest and her wounds needed proper treatment. Riv showed no signs of fatigue, his composure as unruffled as it had been in the Dracon cages. Though Sar noticed he moved with slightly more caution now, suggesting injuries he had concealed. They were led to the central command hub, a reinforced structure partially embedded in the rock face. Inside, the temperature was regulated to a comfortable level, and the lighting dimmed to ease eyes accustomed to the harsh desert glare. The command center was a hive of activity. Communications officers monitoring transmissions, tactical displays showing troop movements across various sectors, intelligence analysts poring over satellite imagery and intercepted Dracon communications. At the center of this organized chaos stood a circular table where 3 senior officers waited, the command staff of the Eastern Sector Resistance Forces. Sar recognized General Voss, the overall commander, Colonel Terrace, head of intelligence, and Major Alec, the operations director. "Captain Valen," General Voss acknowledged her with a nod. "And Specialist Harrow, your return is unexpected." "That seems to be a common reaction, General," Riv replied calmly. "With good reason," Colonel Terrace interjected. "Our intelligence indicated complete loss of all personnel in the Dracon ambush, including you, Captain Valen, when you attempted rescue." "Intelligence was incomplete," Sar stated simply. "So it would seem." General Voss gestured to the tactical display. "We're receiving unusual readings from Dracon territory. Their communication patterns have changed dramatically in the past 12 hours. Less organization, more fragmented transmissions, and their patrols have pulled back from previously established perimeters." "As expected," Riv commented. "Explain," the general demanded. Riv moved to the tactical display, studying it briefly before addressing the command staff. "The Dracon Horde operates on a religious military hierarchy," he began. "Their command structure is inseparable from their spiritual beliefs. By targeting those beliefs, we've created a cascading failure in their organizational integrity." He proceeded to detail the events at the Dracon Arena, the psychological warfare techniques he had employed, the manipulation of religious symbols, the strategic use of resonance mines and sonic weapons. Sar watched the officers' expressions shift from skepticism to dawning appreciation as Riv methodically outlined how a force of hundreds had been neutralized without direct military confrontation. "You're describing psychological operations on a scale we've never attempted against the Dracon," Colonel Terrace observed when Riv concluded. "Because we've been fighting the wrong war," Riv stated bluntly. "Conventional tactics fail against the Dracon because their warriors don't fear death. They fear religious failure. By attacking their belief system, rather than their bodies, we target what they truly value." Major Alec frowned. "This approaches cultural warfare," he noted. There are ethical considerations. There are ethical considerations in all warfare, Riv countered. But I would argue that breaking faith is more humane than breaking bodies. The Draken can rebuild their beliefs. The dead remain dead. General Voss had remained silent throughout the exchange, his weathered face unreadable. Now, he turned to Sar. Captain Valen, you witnessed these events firsthand. What is your assessment? Sar felt the weight of the question. She was a field officer, trained in direct action, not psychological operations. Her instinct was to mistrust Riv's methods as somehow dishonorable. Yet, she couldn't deny their effectiveness. The techniques were unorthodox, she said carefully, but undeniably effective. We escaped with 23 prisoners from a heavily guarded facility, with minimal casualties on either side. And based on what I observed, the Draken forces were completely destabilized by the attack on their religious symbols. She paused, then added, However, I believe this approach should complement rather than replace conventional operations. We need both arrows in our quiver. General Voss nodded slowly. A measured assessment, Captain. He turned back to Riv. Specialist Harrow, can these techniques be replicated? Can they be scaled to affect larger Draken formations? With proper resources and planning, yes, Riv confirmed. The key is identifying the specific religious triggers for each Draken clan. They share a common faith, but with regional variations. Target those precisely, and the effect can be replicated across their entire territory. The command staff exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. We'll need a detailed report, Colonel Terrace decided. Every aspect of your operation, every observation of Drakon response, every technique employed. I'll provide it, Riv agreed. But I'll need access to the intelligence archives. There are historical and anthropological records I need to reference. Granted, General Voss stated. Major-elect, assign Specialist Harrow appropriate clearance and resources. He turned to Sar. Captain Valen, your team performed admirably under extreme circumstances. Get them the rest they need. We'll want a full debriefing once they've recovered. Sar recognized the dismissal and saluted. As she and Riv turned to leave, General Voss added, And Captain, whatever your reservations about these methods, remember that the Draken have shown no such ethical constraints in their campaign against our colonies. Sometimes, to defeat the monster, we must understand how it thinks. Outside the command center, Sar felt the adrenaline that had sustained her finally beginning to ebb. Her wounds throbbed, and exhaustion pressed down on her like a physical weight. You should see the medics, Riv observed, noticing her faltering step. So should you, she replied, noting the careful way he held himself, suggesting injuries he had concealed during their escape and debriefing. Later, he said dismissively, I need to begin compiling that report while the observations are fresh. Sar shook her head in disbelief. Don't you ever rest. A faint smile touched his lips. Rest is a luxury in wartime, Captain, one I rarely indulge in. They parted ways, Riv heading toward the intelligence section, Sar toward the medical facilities where her team was likely being treated. As she walked through the bustling corridors of the outpost, she found herself reflecting on the past 48 hours. The Draken arena seemed like a distant nightmare now. The cages, the bone altar, the religious fervor of their captors. Yet, she could still hear the rumbling of the resonance mines, still see the panic spreading through once disciplined warriors as their faith crumbled around them. In the infirmary, she found Mila, Jaren, and Kohan being treated for various injuries, all minor compared to what they had endured. The rescued prisoners occupied most of the available beds, receiving long overdue medical care. Captain, Jaren greeted her from where a medic was treating a plasma burn on his shoulder. They're saying we made history today. Are they? Sar asked, settling onto an empty treatment bed as a medic began examining her wounds. First successful mass escape from Draken territory. Kohan confirmed from nearby. Not to mention whatever Harrow did to their command structure. Intelligence is calling it a paradigm shift. Mila, always the most taciturn of the team, simply nodded in agreement. It worked, she said simply. That's what matters. As the medic cleaned and dressed her injuries, Sar considered her team's reactions. They were pragmatic, focused on results rather than methods. Perhaps her own reservations about psychological warfare were outdated in this new phase of the conflict. Get some rest, she told them once the medics had finished. We've earned it. Debriefing won't be until tomorrow at earliest. She left the infirmary and made her way to her assigned quarters, a small but private room befitting her rank. The simple comfort of a clean bed and shower seemed like unimaginable luxury after the Draken cages. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to the events in the arena, to Riv's calculated manipulation of Draken beliefs, to the chaos that had resulted. It had been effective. Yes, but something about it still troubled her. After an hour of restless contemplation, she rose and dressed. If sleep wouldn't come, she might as well be productive. She made her way to the intelligence section, where she found Riv exactly as she expected, surrounded by data displays, methodically documenting their experience. He looked up as she entered, unsurprised by her appearance. Couldn't sleep? He guessed. Too much on my mind, she admitted, taking a seat across from him. Including questions about your methods. Riv set aside his work and gave her his full attention. Ask them, he invited. Is there a line? She began. A point at which psychological warfare becomes too invasive, too destructive? An ethical boundary, you mean? He clarified. Yes, there is. I don't target personal beliefs that cause no harm to others. I don't destroy faith simply because it differs from mine. I specifically target belief systems being used to justify violence and oppression. But who decides which beliefs qualify? Sar pressed. Who judges which faiths deserve protection and which deserve manipulation? A fair question, Riv acknowledged. In wartime, those decisions are made by military command, informed by intelligence and ethical advisors. In peacetime, they should be made through diplomatic and cultural exchange. But we're not at peace, Sar noted. No, Riv agreed. We're fighting for survival against an expansionist force that uses religious fervor to justify genocide. In such circumstances, targeting their motivating belief system is not just ethical, but necessary. Sar considered this. When I saw those Draken warriors turning on each other, killing their own kind because of symbols you manipulated, it felt wrong, even if it saved our lives. Would you have preferred a direct assault? Riv asked. Hundreds dead on both sides, the survivors traumatized, and the cycle of violence continuing unabated? No, Sar admitted, but there must be a middle ground. There is, Riv agreed. And finding it is precisely why I document everything so meticulously. Each operation teaches us more about the balance between effectiveness and ethics, between winning the war and preserving our humanity. His words resonated with Sar more than she expected. Throughout her military career, she had grappled with similar questions. The balance between necessary force and unnecessary cruelty, between achieving objectives and maintaining moral principles. I'm not asking you to embrace psychological warfare without reservation, Riv continued. I'm suggesting that we need all available tools to face the threats before us. Sometimes the direct approach is best. Sometimes subtlety achieves more with less bloodshed. Sar nodded slowly. I can accept that, she said. As long as we never lose sight of why we're fighting in the first place. To protect life, Riv stated simply. To preserve freedom of thought and belief. The moment we forget that, we become what we're fighting against. They lapsed into companionable silence, Riv returning to his documentation. Sar lost in thought. Outside, through a narrow window, She could see the first stars appearing in the desert sky as night fell over Outpost Dune. "They surrounded us," she said suddenly, echoing her words from the canyon. Riv looked up, understanding in his eyes. "And we surrounded them with their own fear," he completed the thought. "Perhaps that's the lesson here, Captain. The most effective prison isn't built of metal bars, but of beliefs that limit what we think is possible." Sar considered this, finding unexpected wisdom in the observation. "Then, true freedom comes from questioning those beliefs," she concluded. "Exactly," Riv smiled. A genuine expression this time, not the calculated one he had shown in the Draken arena. "Question everything, especially what you're most certain of. That's how we grow. That's how we adapt. That's how we survive." As the stars multiplied across the desert sky, Sar felt something shift within her. Not a rejection of her military training or ethical principles, but an expansion of them. A recognition that warfare, like everything else, evolved with time and circumstance, and those who failed to evolve with it would inevitably be left behind. "I should try to sleep," she said finally, rising from her seat. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges." "It always does," Riv agreed. "Rest well, Captain." As Sar walked back to her quarters, she felt a new clarity beginning to form. The Draken Horde remained a threat, but no longer an invincible one. Their expansion could be checked, their aggression contained, using methods that minimized bloodshed on both sides. And perhaps, in time, even the Draken might learn from their defeat, might question the beliefs that had led them to violence, might seek a different path forward. It was a hope worth holding, however faint. In her quarters, she finally found sleep. Not the restless, haunted sleep she had expected, but a deep, healing rest. And in her dreams, she saw not the chaos of the Draken arena, but the sunrise over Dawn Ridge, a new day dawning on a changed battlefield. Morning came too soon, the harsh sun of Varkan 4 penetrating even the thick walls of the outpost. Sar woke, feeling surprisingly refreshed, her injuries less painful after proper medical treatment. She dressed in a clean uniform provided by the quartermaster and made her way to the command center for the scheduled debriefing. She found her team already assembled, along with Riv and the senior officers. The tactical display showed updated information from Draken territory, continued disruption in their communication patterns, reduced patrol activity, and what appeared to be internal conflicts between different factions. "Captain Valen," General Voss greeted her. "Your timing is excellent. We were just reviewing the latest intelligence. The Draken are fracturing along clan lines," Colonel Terrace explained, indicating patterns on the display. "Without their unifying religious structure, old rivalries are re-emerging. 3 separate factions have claimed leadership rights. As predicted," Riv noted, unsurprised. "Their society lacks secular unifying principles. Remove the religious authority, and they default to tribal affiliations." "What does this mean for our operations?" Sar asked. "It means opportunity," Major Elek replied. "While they're focused inward, we can strengthen our positions, evacuate threatened colonies, and potentially reclaim territory lost in recent months." "And longer term?" Sar pressed. General Voss considered before answering. "Longer term, we're reassessing our entire strategic approach. Specialist Harrow's methods have demonstrated potential we hadn't fully explored. A task force is being formed to develop similar operations against other Draken strongholds. With appropriate ethical oversight," Colonel Terrace added, perhaps noting Sar's expression. "We're not abandoning our principles, Captain. We're adapting our methods to reduce casualties on all sides." Sar nodded, accepting this explanation. "And my team? After a period of recovery, you'll be attached to the new Psychological Operations Division," General Voss informed her. "Your first-hand experience with these techniques makes you invaluable to the program's development." Sar glanced at her team members, gauging their reactions. Mila maintained her usual stoic expression, but there was a hint of interest in her eyes. Jaren looked intrigued by the new assignment. Kohan was already deep in conversation with Riv about technical aspects of the sonic devices. "We accept the assignment," Sar decided, "on one condition." General Voss raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "We maintain field autonomy," she stated firmly. "Psychological operations require flexibility and on-site decision-making. We can't be effective if we're micromanaged from headquarters." The general exchanged glances with his staff before nodding. "Granted, within established parameters. You'll report to Colonel Terrace, but tactical decisions in the field will be yours." With the formal briefing concluded, the group dispersed to various assignments. Sar found herself walking alongside Riv through the corridors of the outpost. "Psychological Operations Division," she mused. "Not what I expected when I set out to rescue you." "Life rarely gives us what we expect," Riv replied, "but often what we need." "And what do we need now?" Sar asked. "More weapons, better tactics, or something else entirely?" Riv stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "What we need, Captain, is understanding, not just of our enemies, but of ourselves, the beliefs that drive us, the fears that limit us, the hopes that sustain us." "Psychological operations on ourselves?" Sar questioned skeptically. "Self-awareness," Riv corrected, "the most powerful weapon of all." As they continued through the bustling outpost, Sar reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from the Draken cages to a new chapter in the Resistance's strategy. It wasn't the path she would have chosen, but perhaps it was the one they needed most. Outside the outpost walls, the harsh landscape of Varkon 4 stretched to the horizon, unforgiving, challenging, but not unconquerable. Like the Draken, it could be understood, its patterns recognized, its threats mitigated through knowledge and adaptation. "They surrounded us," she murmured once more, the phrase becoming something of a mantra. "And now we understand how to surround them," Riv completed, looking toward the distant horizon where Drakon territory began. "Not with weapons, but with doubt. Not with hatred, but with questions they cannot answer." In that moment, Sar realized that the true battle had only just begun, not just for territory or resources, but for the very nature of conflict itself. A new kind of warfare, fought not with the body, but with the mind. And perhaps, in that evolution, lay the seeds of eventual peace. The dawn light caught the dust particles in the air, turning them to floating gold. A new day on Varkanfur, a new chapter in an ancient conflict. And for Sar Valen and Riv Harrow, a new understanding of what victory might truly mean. They had been surrounded, but they had survived. And in that survival lay a lesson that would reshape the war to come.